think, for me, all I keep seeing is about the justice that died, Justice
Scalia. It's, that's a very interesting case in a lot of ways because he was, and I'm going to be speaking a little softer today too, because my voice is cracking. But he was an originalist in terms of interpreting the Constitution, and his probably the most staunch conservative on the court. So a lot of business cases, there's discrimination, affirmative action, what have you. He tipped some of those cases in terms of the overall, 5-4 votes. So his absence is potentially could affect, depending on who's replaced with, could definitely affect the.
Why is there so much about whether or not President Obama can elect before his term is up?
Because Obama would nominate someone of a particular.
That would tip it the other way.
Exactly. Persuasion. And it's all politics because right now Obama says he's going to fulfill his constitutional. It sounds like he's doing the right thing. Well, back when George Bush was president, it was actually 7 months earlier. I forget who it was.
Democrats did the same thing.
Yeah, and the same people now who are saying that Obama should name it or saying he shouldn't, Bush shouldn't name it. So there's kind of a tradition that if you get close to an election, then you don't send the name forward until the election. Constitution doesn't say when you have to do it. I think it says in due course or due time or something.
So what does that do to any cases that are pending? Do they just wait until there is someone?
You can have eight judges rule, and if they come back 4-4,
4-4, yeah.
then they can either say that the appellate court that heard the case coming up stands, or they can defer it till they get the ninth justice. So it's not like the end of the day.
Right.
So they survive with eight people and move on. But it's a big thing because if you consider, you think, for example, with Affordable Care Act, that there was a lawsuit there based on whether there's a tax and all of that. That was a 5-4 vote. One justice, and we would have that would have been struck down. So, it's one individual can make a lot of difference, and it shouldn't be that way if you think in terms of 9 judges who are just listening to cases and making their decisions. But clearly, they have their own philosophies when they come in. And I think Scalia was, to me, he was like the best guy on the court. In terms of the way he thought. And sometimes he would go out and be a little in left field, even from regardless of how he thought. But he was a brilliant guy. There's no question about it. And how you replace him is going to determine the slant of the court. And then there are a couple of others who are getting up in years too. And if they go in the next 4 years, whoever's elected president will have a huge role, because Senate can block it. The Senate can block it, but
yeah, I didn't understand all that, and so I was some of the reading. It was like, well, if they can block it, yeah. So
the Senate's role is advise and consent, which should mean if the president sends a reasonable person up, you would approve that individual. That's generally the way it was accepted, but you could take it literally and say, as Senate, we're not going to approve anybody. If we don't think that's the absolute best person to us, we're just not going to vote for you. We're not going to approve anybody. So it's possible. It depends on the stature. And I think the last 15, 20 years, you've seen, sort of politics come in on both sides, to block nominees. There are a lot of possibilities. You can have under certain circumstances, the Senate's not in session, you can have a recess appointment, which happens if you have Senate out of session, that means the president can make an appointment and bypass the whole process, which means that Mitch McConnell, who runs the Senate, needs to make sure it's in session from now until the day Obama gets out. Seriously, because what will happen is if he makes the appointment, then they have to go and litigate all that to see if his appointment holds. So it's a big political kind of mess. At some level, I don't see any problem with him sending somebody forward. But then again, the Senate could say, hey, this is not our pick. It's too close to election. We're not going to respond. So And that's what they've already said. They've already signaled they're not gonna approve anybody.
Right.
You know?
I read somewhere where, they said like the longest time it took a president to appoint a judge was like 165 days. And Obama has 300 something days left in his presidency.
His pregnancy. I wasn't aware of that. Wow. But, yeah, and that's assuming he appoints, because it all depends. So you had like, I think it was, Judge Bork when he was, how would you like your name to become a verb?
Yeah.
You know, if you get, you know, nominated, he was nominated and then not approved, so now the word borked is a verb. But, you know, it doesn't count, I think, the time that it takes if you go through multiple nominees. Now, the strategy session comes in. If Obama nominates somebody, he would be smart to nominate somebody that's more moderate, and then put the onus on the Senate to not accept that candidate. If he nominates somebody who's far to the left, the Senate's going to say DOA. So that actually puts the Senate in a precarious situation if he sends somebody, you know, in the middle. But I don't know. It'll be interesting. It's important. It was out of left field. Nobody expected it, and it will have a lot to do with interpretations of. I mean, from a business standpoint, the HR law immediately, affirmative action cases. You know,
Well, something
so we
else
have
that
a
was
lot to say
mentioned
about that.
in that article were some of the things that the president had done that, they use the term illegal, but kind of like with the immigration thing.
Right, yeah,
where he passed the legal-
executive orders.
Yeah,
Is
so
it-
how are they illegal, and so they have, there's a lot about politics I just don't understand.
Well, the short answer to that is things are only illegal if somebody attempts to hold you accountable. I mean, and that's what happened. I mean, the president's role from an executive standpoint is to enforce the law, which means, taken literally, Congress passes a law and the president enforces the law. It's very simple. There is a matter of discretionary, like a limited discretionary area. You could say, like, Congress says, you know, that we're going to have immigration a certain way. The president can make some judgments about, you know, how many people he's going to send to guard the border or whatever. But he can't say, I'm not going to enforce that law. It's his job. It's kind of like the police. The police don't make the laws, they just enforce them. But what's happened, all presidents have used that at some level. They've done executive orders. But the thinking is, and I subscribe to this thinking, that President Obama has actually gone beyond that and said, you know what, the Congress is not doing anything. I don't like what they're doing. They're not dealing with this issue. So I'm just going to start creating my own executive orders and just say, this will be this, that'll be that, this will be over here. And just defying Congress, say, you don't like it, sue me. You know, and the truth is Congress is so feckless it won't sue anybody, you know. So it's, that's what's happening. You know, I think the orders are illegal. I mean, that power should not, you know, rest with the president regardless of the president's party.
Right.
Immigration, president has an obligation to enforce the laws. The president should not have the authority to say, you know, and think about it, immigration. I mean, the president should have the responsibility to hold employers accountable who hire illegal immigrants. What if the president walks up and says, I'm making an order, we're not going to hold them accountable anymore? I mean, that's circumventing the will of the people through Congress as it's designed. So that's kind of a big issue in campaign right now. Is,
Right.
you know, how would, especially on the Republican side, how would they view that? You know, Ted Cruz says, I'll go and undo every single one of them. But then the question is, would you have, you know, you also want the same commitment that not only would you undo them, but you wouldn't just like institute your own, because that's still the same problem. It's, you may get what you want now, but it's not the way we're supposed to do business. You know, you're supposed to defer that to Congress and let them make those decisions. So that's what's coming in there. And those cases, there are several cases that are being, I think one of them was going to the Supreme Court on the illegal, or the alleged illegal executive order on immigration. That was due up in the Supreme Court. There's no question Scalia would have opposed that.
Right.
So, and of course, there's the big story, all the conspiracy theories about his death, because nobody was there, and a pillow was found over his head, and out in rural Texas, and of course that just blows up all these, you know, was he killed? Or, I mean, probably not, but there's interesting circumstances around his death, which
If you watch enough Scandal, you know. You know somebody got him.
I think JFK did it. Elvis. But you never know. I mean, there was nobody there, no witnesses, no nothing. So, and they actually confirmed the death on the phone. That's how which is a little bit odd. The coroner wasn't a coroner present. It was like the cause of death was determined by telephone. It's rural Texas where you have to do stuff when people, because he had a ranch out there. So it's kind of interesting. So, what else we have going on?
I read about cocktails.
Oh, I saw that article. I actually didn't read it, but
Did you read it?
but I guess the cocktail market is going up and
Yeah,
beer's
beer's
going down. So what's going on there?
Well, cocktails or liquor is basically taking the sales of beer, not by a lot right now, but it's steadily growing while beer is steadily losing its market share. And it interests me because I can't drink beer. I've tried. I can't drink
Don't
beer.
like the taste of it.
No, but I did read where they were. I can drink the cocktail. But I read where beer companies was trying to please those that like the cocktails, like with the lamaritas and stuff.
Right.
Cause I can drink a lamarita. So that, and I thought they were just targeting women with those drinks, but I didn't realize it was targeting, people that would rather drink liquor
Right.
than beer.
Interesting. The margins are incredible in that business. Most creative ads for beer ads.
And wine is increasing. I like
Wine is increased, and with alleged health benefits.
Mhm.
For wine. Documented for red wine. Hard
Yeah.
influence
With
on
the,
it. So yeah,
then-
it's one of those products that when people buy, they just don't typically look at the price tag a whole lot. So from that standpoint, it's well thought over market. It's not like Coke and Pepsi where you sometimes look at the deal and buy the cheaper one or something. People don't tend to do that when they buy alcohol. So that prompts the markets, and it's watching these trends is a big deal.
Mhm. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Good, very interesting. Got another one?
I read a little bit about Saudi Arabia and Russia halting production increases on oil,
Okay.
and Iran was, didn't want to join that. Whatever. The prices are falling, but what does it mean in the long run? And I think we spoke a little bit about that last week too. It's good for short term. What does that mean in the long?
We it's an interesting topic to raise. Again, it's worth raising again. Some of the economic data that came out for last month is starting to show at least some positive benefit, or some benefits are positive, some positives from the decline in oil prices. Because you would think, without being sophisticated, you would think if oil is cheaper, everyone wins, right? Prices go down down the line. But it doesn't work that way because of a lot of the debt issues and the investment issues that follow. But once you resettle the industry at a lower price, if it stays there, then you start benefiting because costs do go down. And there's some evidence that it's translated into some lower prices in certain industries, and that's actually promoting sales. So that would be a nice boom, long term to the economy. But the short term is horrible, because you have a lot of companies holding debt that's tied to value of oil. You have a lot of countries who hold debt, and I think examples, you mentioned Russia is a good example. Venezuela is a good example. They have a lot of money tied up in this, and their economies are, ours is based at some level on oil. Their economies run completely on oil.
There was an article I read a couple of weeks ago about, and I can't remember what state it was in, but the city that was just booming, maybe South Dakota or something like that, where they were drilling
Dakotas
oil.
were
And then
all
it just, because of all the, it just dried up, and they were talking about all the expansions that were done in this city, and now it was
Yeah.
kind of like a ghost town, and,
Yeah.
because everyone left, there was nothing to do, they were laying people off and
Yeah.
shutting down operations. So, we think, yay, low gas when we get, when we
Right.
fill up our cars, but it's amazing what the effect is. You just don't think about
Right.
that as a normal person filling up your car.
Well, the whole fracking, success story was up in the Dakotas because of the way that was on private land. It's kind of complicated, but that was where the big boom was. And there was a time that I think if you were a Walmart greeter, you could start at like $15 an hour just as a greeter. And the whole point being is that they needed people up there, just move up and take the jobs. A lot of people would go up there and work on the various oil-related issues. I mean, their economy was booming, but it was all based on that. And once the price declined below their cost of production, which I think was somewhere in the $40 a barrel range, then they have to make a decision. I mean, it costs a lot to close a well and then open it again, so you have to make a long-term decision on that basis, kind of like your simulation. You don't just add production and get rid of it. It's costly either way. So they had to make their decisions, and now that it's so low, a lot of them are just shutting down. And that's part of the incentive, I think, for a lot of these other countries, is to keep that price so low, the sort of Walmart thing, we're going to undercut you until you go out. And once they seal it out, then they can raise it again, because it's illogical for them to keep selling at this price when they can cut production and get more. So the question is how that plays out. Of course, all the Iranians introducing their oil in the market, which used not to be in the market, that's pushes supply, and nobody wants to cut now. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. You think of residual effect on other industries, just like the auto industry right off the bat. Lower price of gasoline, all of a sudden SUV demand goes up. Nobody wants a Toyota Prius anymore. Who cares, right? Now, it doesn't mean gas won't be $4 a gallon next year. We don't know. But right now it's good, and people buy based on what it is right now. People don't think long-term in these issues. So here you are running a car company, and you've been planning this sort of group of models that you're going to promote, and now you're left with oil prices that are lower, and good for your SUVs, but not good for your economy cars, because if you're only paying $1.50 a gallon or something like in South Carolina, who cares what your mileage is? So has having tremendous effects in the market. It's a great example of how one factor can drive a whole lot of things. Good stuff. Well, how are your cases coming? Case research. I don't know. Open it up. Anybody have any questions? I'm not going to ask for formal progress reports or anything. If I do that, I'll let you know in advance. But I'm curious, any issues or what's or if you're saying what cases, that's a bad sign. But how's that going? Because you're nearing the end. Today we talk about strategy formulation, but when you walk out of today, you're going to have most of the content done. So hopefully that means
I've got
good progress.
a question. So there are all the cases in the back of the book, and some of them are shorter, and some of them are like the traditional cases, which seem to be longer.
Right?
Is that sort of what our case is going to look like when it's all done?
No, not at all.
Okay.
The shorter ones are there, actually have two purposes. They're there to sort of be the beginning of a case, if you make the assignment for someone to do that case study, or if you want to have a quick classroom discussion. And some professors like to do that, so that's why they're placed in the back. And they're real-time cases. They're designed to be updated and brought to present. The longer cases are what we'll call traditional cases. They're just written out from a particular point in time, and they set out some current issues. But those are written for you to analyze if you were to do that. Now, if I were to give you a case, I used to give cases for the final exam. I'm not this time because you're doing a simulation. But I would give you one of those cases and say, okay, apply the model, the 25-question model, and do one of those cases. I could give you one of those or one that's similar to that. But what you're doing is not writing the case per se. The way those are written, you're actually writing the analysis of the case.
Okay, yeah. Because I was confused that like those didn't follow the same question order that we've been going through the class. So.
That is correct. Actually, you'll find a lot of those provide much of the same information because they're designed to be largely self-contained. So if I were to assign, I don't do this, but if I were to assign one of those cases and say we'll discuss it next time, then we could have most of the information we need in that case, provided we looked at that situation at that time, at the time it was written. Those are in there because a lot of profs use those in their classes. I have a strong preference for real time in terms of what's, by the time you publish those are 3 years old. I mean, now things like oil prices, you could have a case in there and talk about how high oil prices are. And you're analyzing that, and now they're low. And so it's always interesting to look real time. But again, the way the book is put together, it has pieces for different professors who approach the class a little differently to use. So we don't use those, we just go straight to real-time cases. Your analysis will not look like the cases. Yours will follow that 25-question model and look like the template.
Okay, thank you.
So make sure you use that template. Advice I say, some people say, well, I'll plug it in later. Why? Why would you do that? Use a template up front and cite everything the first time around with the Microsoft Word system. Going back and doing it all later is just a complete waste of time. It's a lot easier to do it the first time. You have a citation, use the footnote, go with it. It's all in there in the template. So make sure you follow that. How about anything else? Any other questions?
And like I said, you don't give study guides for the midterm, but is there
That's my next
anything-
topic, the midterm
Oh.
topic. Yeah. Is that your question on the midterm?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so hearing none, we'll go to the midterm. Midterm, yeah. And I just, actually, a few minutes before coming to class, sort of clarified in my head how I want to structure this. You're going to receive 5 or 6 questions, and you'll have 2 hours to complete it. They're essay questions, no multiple choice. You'll come in on the first, and there they are. The questions will be based on the text. You won't have case questions or companies you discussed. They're based on your understanding of the text and the strategic management model that's presented therein. I'll just kind of say in terms of questions, I tend to give broader questions. I won't ask you, for example, what to compare and contrast 2 of the pieces of legislation in the political forces table or something. I won't do that. What I'll likely do is I could say something like, how have political legal forces affected a particular industry, or how do all the areas of the macro environment affect a particular industry. So I try to be broader in the questions. It's obviously a closed book. You need to know your way around. I don't think you'll be surprised with any of the questions. In fact, I'll be surprised if you're surprised. But you need to know the big picture. I mean, I could ask you, what is Porter's 5-force model, or what about the, Porter's typology, or Miles and Snow's typologies, or the corporate profiles, which ones are better or worse, or when is, stability better than growth? I mean, all those are things that we've talked about in class. So what I do is tend to give you the essay, and you use the time available to give as detailed a response as possible. So no multiple choice, all essay, and you'll have a 2-hour period to write them. Any questions on the exam? That's 2 weeks, actually. Time's coming. So,
What are we gonna do for that last hour that day?
I guess you'll go celebrate.
I
that
didn't
the
know if
exam
we
is
was
over.
to have class after.
No. I mean, you get through an exam with 2 hours, I mean, then you get a break, and it's not worth entertaining you for the life. Now, if you have something, if you want to meet on your case or something like that, it'd be a great time to work it out, just let me know. But there's not going to be an official requirement for you to be here. I might show up at Sandhills one of those days and just surprise you, so, I need to do that to meet people in person, but I'll probably be here on the exam day, I'm not sure. Now, the audio works a lot better from here to there than there to here, which is why I don't show up there a few more times. But maybe that's changed, maybe it's gotten better, so I'm gonna try it out. Any other questions? By the way, this particular lecture is being recorded, and I'll have a link posted if you want to view it again, because several people contacted me and said, hey, I'm sick and not going to be here. I said, okay, because they can record it for you if you ask them. Plus, this also is the nuts and bolts in terms of strategy formulation. So it might be something that, if there are any of them that you want to review in terms of doing your case, this is probably one you want to review. In terms of it will be recorded. There'll be a link posted probably in the next couple of days. All right. Well, let's dive in then. Okay, we've sort of rehash where we are, how we've gotten to where we are at this point. We said in terms of doing a strategic analysis, you first look outside your company, do your industry analysis, macro environment, then you look inside, and then we've looked at strategy. We started with ethics, CSR, sort of that organizational direction issue, and then we went to strategy at 3 levels. So we've gone outside, we've gone inside, and now the question is, so what are we going to do? What's our strategy going to look like? Not what have we done in the past or what are we currently doing, but how do we know how to take that knowledge we have about our company right now and translate that into some sort of direction for the future? Because up until now, we've been describing what is. What are the factors that affect our company? What is our company currently doing? Not what should we be doing, but what is. Chapter 9 shifts that. Chapter 9 shifts us from a mode of thinking about what is important to what should we be doing and why. And the way it does is it brings together everything that we've done to this point, all the previous research that builds plays off all of the previous chapters into a model's the wrong term, but into a framework that helps us make decisions. So that's what Chapter 9 is about. It's about formulating strategy. We've already discussed the content of basic strategies. Now it's about formulation. That having been said, this is the crossroads where what you do with your company in terms of your case analysis might start looking a little bit different. There are certain processes you follow, but actually what you do might look a little different from what other teams do. Because your company being different, you might be focusing on different issues. Hopefully that becomes evident as we go through. But up until this point, everyone's doing sort of the same thing and describing the same issues. Now you're shifting, and because your company is in a different situation from another company, now your case starts to look a little different from some of the others in Chapter 9. So what do you do here? Well, fundamentals of the SWOT analysis. I know everybody in here has seen SWOT. I know that. You might do it in your company. I would implore you to not sleep through our discussion of that. And the reason is there are several caveats in the SWOT that you may not be aware of. In fact, I think the SWOT is not taught correctly for a couple of technical reasons, and I'll get through that. So we'll discuss that. We'll touch briefly on different categories of resources, because that's sort of the intern. We've talked about strategy, but we're going to step back and talk about resources and how those connect in terms of contributing to the strengths and weaknesses. We're going to talk about the SWOT matrix. SWOT matrix is different from SWOT analysis. It's based on analysis, but it's different. So we're going to talk about what that is and how that helps us with decisions. The SCLC matrix that can help us evaluate alternatives, and then finally some miscellaneous issues and formulation. Chapter 9 is not a complicated chapter. In fact, 9 and 10 you'll see are some of the less complicated chapters we have, and we'll probably make good time tonight, but it's very important. 9 is the crossroad. I see a typo right here. It should be 9-1 SWOT analysis. But anyway, SWOT, as you remember from, I'm sure, everywhere else you've heard it, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, is a very popular analytical tool. In fact, it's so popular it's used in other countries, languages, and everything else. I recall when sometimes I'll lecture in Mexico, they have FODA, F-O-D-A, which is, each letter stands for, in Spanish, the same 4 elements. So the SWOT is just sort of a universal tool and makes a whole lot of sense. A couple points about the SWOT though. The strengths and weaknesses are internal, period. There are no, and that's key. I mean, you're talking specifically about internal characteristics of the company, and the opportunities and threats are external. So that division has to be honored. And it's also important to understand that when you do a SWOT, you're not inventing anything new. The SWOT is not about content. The SWOT is about putting it all together. So the SWOT is the tool that helps you get things done, help you decide what you need to do. It doesn't create knowledge or anything. It just helps you organize it so you can make better decisions. It also doesn't tell you what to do. It just helps you think about it. Helps you think about the problems that you're facing and puts it in a useful framework. But let's start for a minute though and just kind of take a step back from the SWOT. Gap analysis is something we do subconsciously a lot in companies, and it's also done formally, and that's simply benchmarking, looking where you ought to be as a company, and then looking where you are and saying, how do we get from where we are to where we ought to be? And I guess my fundamental question to you is that's one way of managing a company, is just to say, instead of doing all this SWOT stuff and all this strategy stuff, let's just look at best practices. Let's look at benchmarks in our industry, see where we are, and see what we have to do. So if you're Burger King and your average drive-through customer is served in 1 minute and 18 seconds, and they're doing it at 53 seconds at McDonald's, well, there's your gap, right? We need to trim that and improve our performance. And if we just manage in terms of gap analysis, we'll take care of our company. Now, is that an effective way to manage strategically? Why or why not?
It depends. It depends on what your market is and what you're trying to use the gap analysis on. You can't use it on every aspect of your business because some things are. Sorry.
That's okay. You didn't see this all on the floor, did you? My throat's killing me, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you can use it on, I guess, I just don't think it can be used for every aspect of business.
Okay. Now, when you say it can't be, do you mean it shouldn't be, or
Well,
it just
yeah,
can't?
it shouldn't be. I mean,
Shouldn't
there
be.
should be some level, I mean, if you're constantly chasing after what somebody else is doing, you don't really have your own creative stint,
Yeah.
you
Well
always
stated.
chasing a tail.
Yeah, well stated. And it may not be that, I mean, all things equal, it'd be great for Burger King to serve people faster, right?
Mhm.
But that may not be what Burger King is trying to put together as a strategy. And in fact, some cases are definitely in that. I think we actually used as an example in the financial ratios, the inventory turnover. I think the Harris Teeter, that's a good example. You could do gap analysis and say Harris Teeter's management comes in and says, we got to improve our inventory turnover. Really? That may not be what you're about. So gap analysis is a useful tool, but it's not a strategic end. And I've found that there are certain people who don't think strategically. I don't know what it is about them. They just can't make the connection. They think tactically. And everything's about looking outside and seeing what someone else is doing and improving performance. And that's a good exercise to think about, but that doesn't drive your strategy. So gap analysis is not a substitute for doing strategic analysis. The value chain is an interesting tool. Used to be very popular, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but essentially you're looking at how each process that goes from beginning of production of a product or service to the end adds value to it, and understanding the value creation in a product. And therefore, you can see what needs to be emphasized, maybe what processes can be eliminated. That's a useful way of thinking about it, but the value chain, again, it doesn't sum everything up. Some companies, from an objective standpoint, waste money, right, in certain areas, but that just depends on what their market is. Others might be doing activities you don't seem to be relevant or worthwhile. Maybe so, but then again, maybe not. So you have to keep that in perspective. The key we want to focus on, or the concept we want to focus more on, is strategic capabilities. This is the idea that you take resources in your company, firm resources that you have, and if you point them in the right direction, they become something that you can do well, and you can use those to position yourself against competitors and strengthen your company. You may have a capability in terms of being able to produce, high value products or high quality, value and quality being a little different. You may have, those are two different capabilities. You may have capabilities in terms of distribution effectiveness. Walmart certainly has that. You may have capability in terms of ability to produce consistent products, which is something McDonald's has. So understanding your capabilities is really, really important. And that's the focus that we want to take. That's our internal focus. What do we do well, and how do the resources we have translate into that? Just because you have a resource, just because I have this computer doesn't mean the computer is any good. Literally I have to turn it on, right? And with this one, it takes 20 minutes to boot up. So, just because you have that resource doesn't mean you pointed it in the right direction. Just because you have a plant doesn't mean you're producing anything anyone wants. So that's the difference between a resource and a capability. Capability is when you've aimed it in the right direction and you're able to get something out of it that your market values. So what are some of these resources, if we want to think about resources that can translate into capabilities? Really three categories of them. And they're human, organizational, and physical resources. They have their own slides, so I'll skip up here. I'll just give you some examples. Again, remember what I said earlier, this is a crossroads where your case analysis differs a little bit from those of your others in the class, different companies. So I'm just going to, these are examples. You may be talking about some of these with your company. You may not. It just depends on who you are or what your company is. Like human resources, board of directors. That might not be a big issue with your company. On the other hand, you might have some turnover and some issues there that make that important. How about the CEO? Do you have really top quality leadership? Again, might be a big issue with you, might not be. Other managers, employees. This tends to be more of an issue with everyone, with every company, but it varies from one to the next. Are your workers the best trained in the industry? Now, again, you've got to be really critical to go through this because every company claims they are, right? We only hire the best people, and I always wonder where everyone else gets a job, But it is true. You have to think about how you are, how your company is positioned to its competitors. Do you have better, turnover practices? You think, for example, pizza delivery, massive turnover in that industry, right? So Domino's, Papa John's, pizza, they're always trying to come up with new ways to entice people to stay in the jobs instead of turning over every 6 months. So if you're doing one of those companies, what are you doing? Is it effective? Is it not? Do you have the ability to retain employees that maybe your competitors don't? Or maybe you don't, and that's a weakness for you. So these are all resources that can translate into capabilities, and ultimately, depending on how they play for your company, can be positive or negative, which means they can be strengths or weaknesses. Organizational resources. Are your strategies consistent? Remember we did the corporate business functional? Do they line up in a way that works for your company? Do your strategies support your mission and goals of the company, or are you out in left field somewhere? It's a couple of issues we haven't talked about yet because we have to get into them in the latter chapters. But is your strategy consistent with your organizational culture and with the structure you've set up? And where are you in the industry? Are you an industry leader? Are you small and trying to grow? These are organizational resources that can determine how your company is positioned and ultimately the strengths and weaknesses you have. Now, the physical resources often we think about. For the most part, that's things you can touch. Do you have a plant somewhere? Where is it located? What's your production capacity? Those are sort of concrete resources. They're mentioned last because the idea is that they're only really, 1/3 is probably the wrong way to say, but they're only one of resources. So it's not just about what you can touch and feel that's real. There are other things as well, but this includes a lot of things like locations, where you're producing, how do you have access to economical sources of supply, do you have contracts with other companies? So these get into the physical resources. So these are some things you can think about in terms of your company. And you do the research on your company, you're going to come up with issues in these three categories in terms of resources. And the idea is to, again, think about these resources, how the company's putting them into play or could put them into play to form capabilities. And that's where companies deliver value and perform well. Now, this framework is really important, and I think it sort of sums up the whole notion of resources and how to think about them, why they're important. It's called the VRIO framework, and what it essentially says is that when you evaluate resources, you can kind of move up the ladder from sort of a basic benefit that you get from resources all the way to the highest benefit level. And I think you'll see this as we go. You start from valuable. A resource is valuable to your company if it can be employed to exploit an opportunity or neutralize a threat. So if you can use it in a positive way, if you have low-cost labor and you can put it into action, you have a piece of equipment you can put into play. You're McDonald's and you can sell your Big Mac at 99 cents to take a shot at Burger King. I mean, these are all important resources, things you can do, right? These are things you can put into play. Now, the last one would be a strategy. That's why it would be called a resource. It's not, again, not something you touch, but that's just valuable. Valuable's fine, but that's not the end of it, okay? Because if you have something pretty simple, a simple resource that you can benefit from, I mean, your competitors can do the same thing. They can buy the same technology. Burger King can lower its price. There's nothing really beneficial and in the long run about these kinds of resources. So we want to move to the next level, and that's rare. In other words, is that resource not only valuable, but is it something that not all of your competitors have as well? If you don't get into that category, then everything you do is going to get duplicated by your competitors, and you're not really going to enjoy any long-term benefit. So when you get to rare, that means you're doing things not all of your competitors can copy you. So that's good. But then that doesn't solve everything, because even if it's rare, if what you're doing is successful, even if you're one of the few that can do it, what are your competitors going to try to do? Yeah, they're going to say, how can we? Well, we know it's not much out there, but let's figure it out. Let's see what we can do here. Over time, they will develop that capability, right? So then you get to the next category, which is inimitable. In other words, cannot be easily imitated. That really is good, because you're doing something that's not only valuable, and it's rare because not everyone has it, but those who don't have it can't just copy it quickly. Think of some interesting examples. Some of these can be, you don't think of at first glance. I think of McDonald's. McDonald's produces things its food products in a very consistent manner. From one McDonald's to the next, they taste bland, but I mean, they're almost the same, right? And that's something they do very well. It is. And you might say, well, that's not great. Well, think about it. They do a better job than everyone else. Why have they been able to figure that out? And it seems like if you go to another fast food restaurant, you get more variance in food taste from one place to the next. How is it the training? Is it whatever it is, McDonald's has figured something out qualitatively that they can do a little bit better. And apparently not everyone can do it. And it's hard to imitate. So that's a real plus for them in the market. Okay? Now the highest level here is organization. And this is when you not only have value, rare, and inimitability, work with that, but you're actually able to pull all that stuff together as an organization. You have an entire value proposition that is sort of intertwined in a way that your competitors just can't match. And I think a company there be like Apple. It's not just about technology and an iPhone and all that. Apple sort of mastered technology. They have Apple, sort of the Mac way of thinking. If you have Macs or whatever, it thinks in a different way. The iPhone, sort of responds a little different way. Then they have the software that supports it. And one thing Mac's been about from the beginning is a good-looking machine. And you might say, well, what does that have to do with computer? Well, it's part of it. It's supposed to look good on your desk to inspire creativity, right? So Apple has really developed an entire organization around a series of resources and capabilities that merged. Did you bring enough for everybody? just kidding. So Apple has developed this whole sense of all it does into one package, and that package, you can imitate bits and pieces of it. Samsung can come up with a phone that's competitive to the iPhone. It's hard to come up with the entire package of what Apple's doing. I mean, bless their hearts. Microsoft comes up with one of the Windows, and it just has to copy the old, Mac OS, right? It's just what it does. So Apple has done that very well, and that's the highest level. That's what you want to have, ideally, an organization where all the pieces are put together so that it is so complex and interwoven that your competitors just simply, you're going to be out there doing your thing, and your competitors really can't duplicate that. They're going to have to do something else. So that's just a way of thinking about it. Needless to say, the higher up you are, I guess the way the chart's listed, the further down you are. The further you move toward organization with resources and then the capabilities, the better. And those are the ones you want to emphasize more. So if you're trying to think, what should we be basing our strategy on? Well, ideally, resources that are further down this line, because those are the ones you'll be able to get the most, extract the most benefit from as a company. All right, so let's return to the SWOT a little bit. We talked about the internal piece of it, the strengths and weaknesses. Let's talk about the external side, the opportunities and threats. Now, I said earlier, the SWOT doesn't, you don't invent any new information here. There's nothing new that comes in the SWOT. This is especially true on the external side. Opportunities and threats are nothing more than your industry analysis and your external environment analysis applied specifically to your company. Okay, I'll say that again. The opportunities and threats, nothing more than taking the work you've already done in the macro environment and in the industry analysis that you did at the industry level and applied it to the industry, but now you're applying it specifically to your company. Nothing new is invented here. Okay? So some of it might sound alike, and you might say, well, I'm kind of repeating myself here. Might be, because when you talked about, let's say you analyzed gas prices, or gas prices are going down, or whatever, and you did that in your macro environmental analysis. So when you get to this point here, you might have referred to how that change in the economy or in that particular factor is affecting your industry. Now you're talking about how it affects your particular company. The effect might be the same, but it might be slightly different too. Okay? Because think a good example of that would be a company like Walmart. There are a lot of things that affect retail in general that don't affect Walmart the exact same way, because it's so large, it's able to manipulate some of the things that go on. Okay? So what you're doing is taking the issues that you discussed and apply to the industry. Now you're applying them to your company. We're going to have an example that walks through this in a second. So again, it's sort of another way of restating that. If you have anything listed for your opportunities and threats that you didn't already cover, then you're either making a mistake because you're covering something you shouldn't cover, or you need to go back and plug it in earlier. There shouldn't be anything new when you get to the opportunities and threats. Now, just a couple of pitfalls to avoid. Don't confuse internal and external. It's just amazing how often this happens. I think people just get kind of loose with this. But if you're talking about a characteristic of your company, if you cite good advertising program, that's not an opportunity. That's something your company is doing. That's a characteristic, it's a resource, a capability, whatever, of your company. That's a strength or weakness. So if it's about your company's doing it, it defines your company, that's internal, that's strength or weakness. Anything outside the company, opportunity and threat. You've got to make that distinction. If you don't, the matrix and everything, the rest of the tools that you use will fall apart. So that's something to make sure you get right. And this other one is, it's like, I preach this till I'm blue in the face, and everyone keeps making the same mistake. And the reason is because we use the word opportunity in a different sense, in a broader sense in just everyday language than we use it in the SWOT analysis. And this is where this is taught differently, and I think technically not correct in a lot of places you go. So that's why I want you to keep you awake for this part of the discussion. An opportunity is something outside the company that presents a potential positive should the company take action. Same way, a threat's something outside the company that presents a potential negative should the company take action or not take action. Okay, so these are things that are outside that could be good or bad. They're called opportunities or threats. Opportunities are not things that you do. Things that you do are alternatives. We haven't gotten there yet. We're close, but we haven't gotten there yet. So if you have if the beginning of your opportunity is the word to do this or to expand, or then you've now skipped the whole concept of opportunities and you've gone into alternatives. We haven't gotten there yet, and it's so critical to keep those distinct, because if you don't, what you're doing is you're short-circuiting the process and you're not connecting your internal and external. You're just moving straight on to options, and you're likely to overlook something. So this is a huge technical issue to think through. Okay? And I think our example will probably reinforce that. It's a simple example, but we'll hit it in just a second here. Okay, we knocked 4 steps out in this chapter. S, W, O, and T. Right? You do have to list your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and threats. And again, this is a chapter about a lot of practical issues. So one of the questions that often comes up is how many strengths should I have, or how many threats, or how much detail, or whatever. You typically need about a paragraph to describe each of these. Don't just say, financial stability or something and then leave it. You would want to explain what that means. Here, give me some evidence. Give some support on it. And typically, again, paragraph describes each one. So how many strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats should you have? So,
I said 3
I thought you were going to be 3.
or 4.
Well, you're negotiating low here, right?
It depends.
Just 2 and be done with it. It depends, right? Well, if you only have 3 or 4, I'm going to step back to the middle here. If you only have 3 or 4, there's a good chance that in terms of a sophisticated analysis, you're missing some important areas. The problem is if you say, well, we want to be really thorough, and we got 15. Well, now what you've done is you've created so much detail, you can't manage it. No strategy, no process is useful if it is so complicated that you throw up your hand and say, I can't follow it. Here's the math, if you can follow this. If you have, right here, this is our SWOT matrix, which is coming. But if you have, let's say, 15 strengths, 15 weaknesses, 15 opportunities, and 15 threats. Okay? And let's say we're trying to be creative here and think about ways that our internal factors might combine with our external factors, because that's how we want to develop alternatives. That's where we're headed here. If we do that, how many possible combinations of internal and external factors do we have? It's a math question, so someone should be able to see that. You have 15 in each category. How many possible combinations of internal and external factors could there be?
900.
Perfect, 900, which is essentially 30 on one side times 30 on the other. That's a long night, thinking through 900 possibilities, right? A lot of creativity you got to get through, a lot of cocktails or beer or whatever you drink to get through that one. So what's interesting though,
Yes.
you lower this number, say to 7, cut it in half. Now we do our math. We got 14 times 14, you're up down 256, right? Now that's still a lot, but that's a lot less than 900. Now the point being, there's no magic number. But if you're trying to so much detail where you have long lists in each category, you're probably going so deep that it's going to be hard to analyze any of them. So what I like to encourage is that when you start getting long lists, look at possibilities to combine certain factors. Okay? You may have 2 or 3 strengths, for example, that if you pull them together, really getting at the same thing, maybe getting at good marketing program, or maybe getting at your your distribution efficiency or something. Try to pull them together into one factor if you can do it. Okay? Same is true across the board. It makes it more manageable. Again, the key is, you want to be as detailed as you need to understand your company. But if you get so detailed, then you create a real mess when you try to do anything with it. Okay? There's nothing worse than, and I know this from doing consulting and going through the whole development of strategies, than having so much stuff on the board that everyone feels good about themselves for about 5 minutes by having creating this long list of stuff. Then they're like, where do we go from here? Nobody knows. It's just so complicated. You've got to boil it down. What are the essentials? 3 is probably not enough, But if you get way higher up, in the 10, 15, you're making it complicated. So now everyone's going to do exactly 7. I don't want you to do that. But I'm just kind of throwing that out as a neighborhood for a good way to think about it. Okay. Now, this is sort of alluded to the SWOT matrix. This is where we're headed. The SWOT matrix is where you list your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Essentially, the SWOT analysis. You list it in abbreviated forms, and you look to combine. The idea is there something you're doing internally, or some ability or capability you have that can be connected to something going on in the environment that, now there's an option, there's an alternative for us. So an action we can take. And that's what you're looking at. Now, these can come in 4 different categories, if you will. You don't, when you identify these, you don't identify them which category you're in per se. If you do your own SWOT matrix, you're identifying like strength number 1 combines with weakness with opportunity number 7, but you don't put them in these 4 boxes necessarily. These 4 categories are provided just to illustrate how this works. If you combine a strength with an opportunity, what you're saying is, hey, there's something we do well, and there's a potential positive out there, and we see a connection. If we take what we do well and apply it toward that positive, we can benefit as a company. That's often what we think about when we talk about alternatives. What do we do good? What's out there that we can capitalize on? Bing, there it is. That's one option. These are always offensive alternatives. The opposite is a weakness threat. This is where you say, we don't do something well at all. We're weak in this area, and there's something external that if we don't shore this weakness up or take some kind of action to improve it, we're going to lose. We're going to get eaten alive here. So what you're doing is you're taking defensive action. How can we eliminate the negative effects of that particular threat? The last 2 categories can go either offensive or defense, depending on how you look at them. The strength threat says, how can we take a strength that we have, something we do well, apply it a certain way so that a threat that exists will not hurt our company. For the other is the weakness. How can we take something we don't do well, maybe shore it up so that it might allow us to get some benefits from an opportunity. The point being, though, these alternatives are things we could do. This is action. Okay, remember we said opportunities and threats, they're just states of existence of what's going on outside our company and how it affects our company. Alternatives are actions, or things we could take. Just because we list it as an alternative doesn't mean we're going to do it. What it means is that it's conceivable, seems like something we should be considering, and we're going to give it a good, thorough analysis, but it doesn't mean we'll necessarily adopt it. Okay? Now, here's the example that I play out. If you said 2 or 3, you could peek to this. This is way, way oversimplified. It's designed to illustrate the point, but you can see with just 2 or 3 in each box, it's really kind of simple. But I think it illustrates the point well, and that's why I deliberately try to keep it on the simple side. Now, this is a hypothetical analysis of McDonald's. For the sake of discussion, assume that it's done correctly. Don't nitpick whether you think one of the threats shouldn't be there or whatever, because that's not the point. Besides, once you publish this, things can change, and some of it might not be in real time as accurate as it once was. So let's just sort of take it as assuming the content is correct. Okay? Now, in this analysis, and again, it's oversimplified, we only have a few in each box, what we're saying is that we've looked at McDonald's, we've done all the research, McDonald's has three things that are its core strengths. It's financial stability and resources. Now, of course, if we'd done the analysis, we would have a paragraph or a long discussion of that, so we're just abbreviating it here. Brand name and recognition, well-known products, well-recognized, strong brand name, and consistency, what I just mentioned about consistency across different locations. But so the weaknesses, McDonald's has that reputation for bland tasting fast food. It's not, again, you could argue that that's actually, they've improved a little bit in that area, but again, just run with this. And also dependence on fried foods. Most of the profits come from that sort of deep fried kind of thing. You might say, what about salads? They don't sell many of those, frankly. If you just look at the numbers, they offer them, but that's another story. Now, what's going on outside McDonald's? What did we come across in our industry analysis and in our macro environmental analysis that gives us indications of things that might be positive or negative for the company? Well, we have four factors here that we've identified, 2 opportunities and 2 threats. Opportunity number 1, growth in emerging economies. Now, well, we might talk about those emerging economies as affecting all fast food restaurants, but now we're addressing it specifically for McDonald's. So we might go into depth and talk about some specific countries here, but clearly that growth in emerging economies gives McDonald's an opportunity. If they were to act on it, they could go into places that they currently don't exist. Not to say we want to do that. We haven't gotten an alternative stage yet, but that's the alternative. We're untapped markets in emerging economies. The second is increasing health consciousness in U.S. and other markets. I'm going to come back and comment on this after I finish the threats a little more, but this is essentially saying, look, people are more health conscious, and it affects how they are purchasing fast food, and specifically what the kinds of things they might want to get at McDonald's. Threats, we have a global economic downturn. Since originating this matrix, there's been a downturn, it's got an upturn, and now it looks like another downturn. So let's just assume that's where we are now. The other threat is the growing popularity of easy-to-prepare foods like frozen foods, microwavable, grocery store type items that you can prepare on your own, which would be a substitute for McDonald's, right? Remember, it's not a competitor. It'd be a substitute. Now let me come back to opportunity number 2. Anybody argue that increasing health consciousness should be a threat?
I would have thought it was a threat.
Okay. Why?
I apologize if this is wrong, but after all the years of business school I've been in, I swear I've never done this correctly. Like, this is the first time it's been explained to me correctly. But so if we're thinking about McDonald's, and as we're making the SWOT analysis, or the, whatever it's called, the matrix.
SWOT matrix, yeah.
Thank you. Because I have McDonald's in the back of my mind, and I know it's not healthy, I would have automatically put that as a weakness.
Okay. Well, again, you could say that McDonald's, the weakness we have that plays off of this is weakness number 2. That depends on fried foods, because what you're saying is McDonald's is heavily profit dependent on foods that are not typically your most healthy products.
And it's not associated with healthy food.
It's not associated. So you could actually pull all of that into one weakness, or you could divide that up if you wanted to talk about the PR piece of it, the marketing piece of it, and all of that. Okay, but we're essentially just pulling into on the weakness side, the dependence. But it's always interesting. You could say the health consciousness is an opportunity, because if certain actions are taken, McDonald's could benefit. Or you could say it's a threat, because if certain actions aren't taken, McDonald's. The point is, you could plug it either way. That doesn't matter, as long as you get it in there. As long as it's there, you can present it either way. I'm not going to split hairs on it, because it really depends on what side of the coin you're looking at. Some of these are obviously fit, opportunity, or threat, but there are always a few in there that it just depends on how you want to look at it. It could go either way. So it's not right or wrong to put it in either category. Now, it would be right or wrong. It would be wrong to put health consciousness on the strength or weakness side, because it's not an internal factor. If you want to talk about the fact that McDonald's produces products that aren't healthy, now that's a weakness. But that's what McDonald's is doing. The opportunity or the threat in terms of health consciousness, that's what's going on out there in the environment. that's the opportunity or threat.
Okay.
Okay?
Like you were saying, that it can be interchangeable. Would it be wrong if you put the same thing in both?
Good question. I'm not going to count off if you do, but it's kind of a waste of ink, to do it. Because if you just cover it, you could actually, if you felt better about this, you could put a little comment saying, this could have been in the other category if you wanted to. It's not, you can do it in both, but it just creates more bulk in your matrix. It's not necessary as long as it's in one of them. Okay. Another point too is you could have the same issue as a strength and a weakness potentially. If you have something you do well in one respect but not well in another respect. Okay. It depends on your company, depends on what you come up with. So that's possible. Do you want to put them in both boxes? Yeah, you could, but you don't really have to. As long as you just understand what you're talking about, you discuss it and you present it. Then it'll get to the matrix. All right, so what we're asking here in the matrix, and this is the movement from the analysis to the matrix. Instead of just listing at these, and this is commonly what's done when people do SWOT. They do the SWOT, and then they say, well, let's look at the opportunities and see what we want to do. That's not right. SWOT opportunities are things out there. That's the stuff you should be doing. What you should be thinking about is how we combine our internal and external characteristics to create alternatives, and those are the 4 categories we just mentioned. Now we've done that and created 3 alternatives here. You could probably create a few more if you played with this long enough, but these illustrate the point. And notice that each one of them doesn't have just one opportunity or one internal, one external. So you can have multiple internals, multiple externals pulling together here. That's fine. And often that works out to be the case. So alternative 1. Let's take our first 2 strengths, our financial stability and resources and the brand name and recognition we have, combine that with the growth in emerging economy and say, aha, we can launch new locations in the BRIC countries. That'd be Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Now, you might say, why those countries? Why not, Ethiopia and whatever? And there's got to be a logic behind it. In other words, you've done the research on the different economies and so you have a reason to recommend these 4 countries. Okay, you don't just say expand globally. That's nothing. I mean, where are you going to go? I don't know. We'll figure that out. That's not a good answer. You want to think about specifically what you're considering doing and have some logic as to why you're doing it. Okay? The second alternative we have, say, what if we take our 2 weaknesses and combine them with our second opportunity? This goes back to sort of what the example we were given before. We have bland, fat-tasting fast food, sort of our reputation, and a lot of it's fried, and you've got this increasing health consciousness out there. So what if we were to expand our healthier food alternatives? Now, in many respects, that's what McDonald's has done. How much value they've gotten out of that, I don't know, it's debatable, because they don't, still, the lion's share of what they sell is not in that category. But you could say that they haven't done some of that already. But that's still another area they could do if they wanted to do that. Alternative 3, what if we took the second and third strengths and combined it with the second threat? So we're back to our brand name and consistency. Remember, the same issue, the same internal, external force could be a player in multiple alternatives. You can use them at different times. We're going to take that brand name and recognition and our consistency in operations and say, what about the growing popularity of easier to prepare items in grocery stores? What if we launch our own, McDonald's products? Now, you would need to be more specific here, because I don't know if you want to do like a frozen Big Mac, microwavable Big Mac. That'd probably be a bad product, okay? And what's interesting is I've been playing off this example for a lot of years and sort of building it a little bit. First time we talked about it, you never saw any fast food branded products in grocery stores. Now you see a lot of them. I don't know if McDonald's has any, but you've got, what would McDonald's sell? Nuggets or something? Checkers has it. You've got Taco Bell's got stuff. White Castle's got burgers. So you actually have some of this that's happened. Because the first time I'd cover this, students would laugh. Say, you're crazy. I mean, fast food, it would screw up their image. Who's going to buy this stuff and take it home and put it in the microwave? They would tell you that. But now there's been an acceptance to that. A lot of the products you see there are marketed with that brand name of a fast food restaurant or a fast casual sometimes. So that's something you could do. So these are 3 alternatives. In terms of presenting them, you want to obviously go into more detail. I just did the summary thing. When you say expand healthier food alternatives, what are you talking about specifically? What are you talking about doing? Launch foods in grocery stores. What particular products are you going to launch and why? So these, you want to spell out the alternatives so we know exactly what you're considering.
And you want all that in the matrix?
No, you can do those at
Outside.
the matrix. You abbreviate everything for
Okay,
simplicity.
that's what I was thinking.
But you just you'll have a paragraph, alternative
Okay.
1, alternative 2, and 3, and you'll
Okay.
lay out specifically what you're thinking. I mean, again, look at it this way. If you're, if you're doing an analysis for a company and you got hundreds of millions of dollars on the line, you're not going to just sort of make a broad brush assessment. You're going to go deep enough to explain what it is you're thinking about and why. So you want to make sure you give that attention. All right. So, what are your questions or comments on this matrix? Anything unclear about it? All right, that's a good sign. So what do you do once you have these alternatives? Well, there's no magic formula to figure out which ones you want to pursue, but you can have different categories. For example, you could pursue all of your alternatives. Back up again, look at this. We could decide to launch new locations in BRIC nations, have more healthier food alternatives, and go into grocery stores, right? Are any of those mutually exclusive? Now, only to the extent that we might need resources and we might run out of resources. It's not like doing one means you can't do the other. Okay, so we could pursue multiples here, or we could decide we don't want to do any of them. Continue as we're doing now, and that's going to be where we want to go. But one tool for thinking about how these alternatives could fit together is the SLSC matrix. Okay. Now, what you do here is you look at I'm not going to draw this up because it's already nicer on the display. You look at the level of alternative, whether it's a corporate, business, or functional level of strategy we're talking about changing, and then you look at the degree of strategy complexity. Now, obviously, all things equal, lower complexity is easier to put into play. Now, if you look at these, and these particular examples tend to sort of line up in a diagonal, that doesn't mean they always do that. That's just how these 3 happen to do. So you say, all right, what about healthier food alternatives? That's not complicated. You're adding menu items. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it just means it's not complicated. Relatively speaking, you're adding menu items, and it's a functional issue. Now, it might bleed into business a little bit, but actually putting that into play is about operations. It's about going in and just having the ability to start making different products. Make a different smoothie or have another wrap or something like that. It's primarily a functional issue, and it's not heavily complex. Now, go to the other side, launch new locations, that's complex. You got to figure out where to go, political issues, all sorts of locational factors, a lot of money on the table. There's a lot involved there, and that's a corporate issue because it's about growth. Okay, gross stability retrenchment. So that goes in that top category. In the middle is the frozen foods and grocery outlets. That's probably medium complexity because you're having to sort of come up with different alternative or different recipes, if you will, to somehow take what you make in the store and make it appropriate for frozen foods. You've got a lot of analysis to make sure that you don't cannibalize your existing products or hurt the image in terms of what you're selling in the stores. And it is primarily a business level strategy. It's about how you compete. Okay, it bleeds a little bit over in the functional side, but it's probably more business level. So by plotting your strategy or strategy alternatives on the matrix, it can help you think about the complexity and the level of strategies, because what you'll find is you may not want to be dealing with multiple strategy alternatives in the same box. Because if you're looking at 2 or 3 things, say in business strategy, those things might move your company in a different direction. Okay, if you're spread out like this, you might be able to do something that's corporate, something business, something functional. And of course, you have too much complexity, too many complex strategies all at the same time, things can get mighty confusing pretty quickly. So this is not a magic wand. It doesn't tell you what to do. Just a way of thinking about some of your alternatives. Okay? So what are some issues to think about in terms of putting a strategy together? Because we're at that point now where we've done the SWOT matrix, we've done the SWOT analysis, SWOT matrix, and we've got alternatives. We want to say, oh, what do we actually want to do? Which of these alternatives are worth pursuing? And we can look at pros and cons, and that's the way we approach this. But what are some side issues that help us think about that? One is a simple question. Do the benefits outweigh the costs of strategic change in general? Change has its cost, simply because you're taking the train that's going down the track and switching directions. It costs you to switch directions, even if you're going in the right direction or making a change to the right direction. So all things being equal, would you want to change strategies?
It's beneficial.
Well, all things being equal, if they both offer the same benefit. No, you don't need to change for change's sake. Now, I'm not trying to discourage everyone, tell everyone to be real conservative in what they recommend, but again, especially the more complex the strategy, the more bang you need to be getting out of that buck, or it's not worth it. I mean, you don't want to open up a whole new set of stores and expand and this, that, and the other, and at the end of the day, you have the same returns that you have right now. What's the point in that? There needs to be a real benefit to outweigh the costs. So that's something to think about in terms of strategic change. What is the complexity of what you're going to put into play, and do you really get the benefits to justify that complexity and sometimes that risk? Now the social responsibility and ethics. Are there positions your company is taking with regard to CSR or ethical stances, and some of the moves that you're making might challenge us? There might not be any relationship at all, but you might have one. A good example is if you're looking at moving production abroad. Is that an issue for your company of the stance you want to take in terms of where you produce products? Do you believe it's an ethical issue or a CSR issue? If it is, this is where you want to bring it into play. You might not do something that makes financial sense because it doesn't pass your ethics or CSR filter. What effect does a change in strategy have on existing resources? Remember, when you do something new, it does affect what you're already doing. And this is, I'm going to go back to McDonald's since we're using that example. McDonald's has expanded its product line. Let's use Burger King because I just read in the journal, Burger King's adding a new product. You know what it is? Hot dogs.
Yeah,
Hot dogs
it
at
has
Burger King.
Snoop Dogg on there, so.
Yeah, so, is that a good idea?
I don't think so.
Well, why not? I mean, if you don't, here's the theory. If you go into Burger King and don't like it, just order something else, right?
Yeah, but I just, when I heard that, it was like, why would they want to sell hot dogs? I don't know. I've always thought of Burger King as
Burger
the
King,
flame broiled
burger.
burger, not.
Flame broiled hot dogs now.
Right.
Yeah,
Hot
I
dogs
guess.
on that grill.
What do you think? Let's sort of critically analyze the thinking here. Is that a good move?
If they're trying to compete with, especially in this area, like Cookout, like I know in Lumberton, it's a Cookout right next to Burger King.
Well, it's a national move, so you have to think about it. I'm
Yeah,
not
broader
saying
base, but-
good or bad based on
Yeah.
that. I'm just saying think of it in terms of big picture.
Hardee's has hot
Yeah,
dogs.
hot dogs.
Okay, so there are some players that have hot dogs, and it does allow them position.
Check.
Checkers. Hot dogs are cheap because nobody knows what's in them anyway. Plaster them together, and food that they don't sell, they can send to a company, mold it together into a hot dog, I guess. So,
So it's your leftovers.
leftover stuff they can't sell.
Dog food.
Dog food, whatever. But seriously, it's from that standpoint, you can say, okay, you're opening up to maybe a new market, maybe some people who would come there for the hot dog. Or what if all five of us are going out, and five of us in this particular room, are going out to eat dinner or somewhere, and I'm a hot dog fan, so I go to Burger King and get the hot dog, well, the other four of you come along and buy other things. So it actually benefits the entire business, right?
Yes.
Okay. What's the downside, though? If it sounds like adding an option is just adding an option.
It's risky, and they could end up losing money or they don't sell that product at all.
How?
I mean, not at all, but
I mean, I could argue that, well, we'll just make a few hot dogs in the morning, make them when they order them. I mean, we're not gonna, I could trim that risk a good bit.
Do you think that it confuses people as far as their brand,
Okay.
their image, because they're
That's-
Burger King, not Hot Dog King?
That's a good point. And there's an interesting analogy that KFC used to advertise that they did only chicken. And of course, they were still doing that, advertising that here, when abroad they were actually starting to sell fish. And of course, now they've added other non-chicken products here. I mean, part of the change from Kentucky Fried Chicken to KFC was getting chicken out of the name because they were anticipating a shift to broaden some of the products away from chicken, and they didn't want to create that image problem. But that's true. Now it's, what is Burger King known for but as hot dogs? That could be an issue. There's a more practical concern, though, that's related to that that nobody's brought up. How do you design a fast food restaurant ultimately? What do you try to do?
Make the cooking efficient.
Yeah, super efficient, right? You want to have some guy in the back who can access all the different stuff to make all the burgers or tacos or whatever you're making and get things in and out pretty quickly. You try to minimize that space too, because you want maximum space for the dining area so people can eat in store. Taco Bell's actually done very well. They have it's almost a tiny little spot that the guy back there has everything in one play, and that makes it easy for them to get their products out efficiently. From that standpoint, if you add hot dogs, you now have another inventory item. It's not so much cost, but you've got another item in the freezer. You got another preparation station somewhere. You've got another item you got to watch, make sure it doesn't time out in terms of products you make. You've got more training. Everyone's got to be trained now to make the hot dogs or how much chili to put on them or whatever. You've got something else to do, and you've got more space that you have to take up. Where does that stuff just come out of thin air? Well, it's easy for top management sometimes to think, well, yeah, they can just do hot dogs. Well, maybe so, but then when you add hot dogs and you add spicy chicken sandwich and then you add shrimp burger and you have all this other stuff in there, now you've created, a complete short order cook when what used to be fast food. McDonald's actually had this problem years ago. It expanded and had a lot of new products, and they were having issues because they were slowing down their service because of too much stuff going on back there, hiring too many people to try to manage it. They cut back a lot of products and nobody was buying, and said, we're going to give you less choice, but we're going to be able to move more efficiently through these products. They increase their service, quality of service, and cut their service time. Now they're moving back in the other direction. They think they figured out how to add products without screwing up the whole system. The point is, this is debatable. You could say it's, if you do this right, adding hot dogs is a good thing. It adds an option. My point is that it's not a slam dunk, right? It's not obviously a good thing to do because there is a cost on the other side of the equation. You have to factor that in. You can't be all things to all people. You're putting additional resources involved. That just may be space. It may be hiring an extra person to make the hot dogs. You don't just do that in a vacuum. You're having additional resources to allocate to get it done. So think through that process about resources. Don't discount the resources that you're going to have to allocate to implement a strategy. Finally, how will competitors respond when the change is implemented? Let's just assume that Burger King introduces the hot dog and everyone's buying it. Do you think nobody else is going to add a hot dog?
McDonald's will have
They're
corn
gonna
dogs.
jump on
Yeah,
it.
I mean, they'll do something, right? And that's what always happens. And it's interesting. Wendy's has it's like a $4 meal with a bacon cheeseburger, nuggets, fries, and a drink or something, $4. And I'm not paying any attention to this. I'll just see the ads. Next thing you know, Burger King's got its own version. What that tells me is that, and of course, Hardee's had the $5 bag or whatever. What it tells me is
Real deal.
that they were having some success. And what was happening is Burger King watched that and said, it's okay. They seem to be having some success with this promo. Let's come up with our own version of it. So you can often have that. It's the whole notion of imitation. If you're just applying resources that can be easily imitated, then your competitors get to watch you and see if it works. And if it does, bingo, they just come right out and do it. And you've seen that in the big picture all throughout the industry. Hardee's was, I think, the first to do biscuits, okay, for breakfast. They turned out to be successful. Now everybody does biscuits, right? You can sit back and watch and just apply it. So don't assume your competitors are going to sit back and watch you just take market share. They're going to respond a certain way as well. So these are some things to think about. What's the ideal strategic approach? If there is one, it would be blue ocean. And this is where you do something. Think back of that whole organizational category of resources where you do a combination of things in a way that's so unique and so valuable and so rare and so inimitable that no one can duplicate it. You're just out there all by yourself. That's kind of Apple right now in terms of Mac computers. I'm a Mac head. I love those computers, and as long as they don't really screw me up, I'm just going to go buy one. Frankly, don't tell them this, but I don't care what their price is. I mean, I'm already hooked on it, right? So that's what I'm going to buy. That's where you want to be as a company. No one else is duplicating it. No one else is getting close to the product. Bingo, that's where it is. Now, I used to be that way with an iPhone. Over a long period of time, I've decided the iPhone is not so much better than other phones that next time around, I'm going to be more open. But for a while, the iPhone was kind of that blue ocean. It was something technologically superior, and in my head at least, it was way ahead of everything else, and they'd figured out the entire world in that one product. Now I think they've drifted, if you think of the ocean, and some others have drifted closer. So the idea behind blue ocean is instead of positioning your company relative to competitors and being a little cheaper, a little better, to say, hey, you guys have that, we're over here. We're going to offer something, a type of product or service or offering that is different. We just don't have any competition. Well, the problem, of course, is you may be out there in the ocean all alone and drown. You don't know what you're doing. But if you're successful, you can clean up. The examples here that you think of are places like Starbucks. When Starbucks came out, it was a one-of-a-kind place. I mean, and if you dig it, well, there you are, and they're charging high margins and $4 for a cup of coffee. Had a lot of success with that. Now, there are others that have come and invaded that ocean, but for a while, Starbucks was there. eBay, good example. Cirque du Soleil, if you're familiar with them, the circus they run, which is sort of circus art. If you Google it, it's really kind of neat, but it's just not, there's not a comparable offering to that. Now, if you do something like that, people might say, that's weird, I don't want to go there. But if you can catch people's imagination, you're the one that's known for it. You're like the place to go. So you see some good examples of this, but again, you got to be careful when you're out there in the ocean. You might, if you're all alone, you got to make sure you know what you're doing out there, or you can find yourself drowning. All right, so we've added 3 more steps here. This is your strategic alternatives. We've done the SWOT analysis, the SWOT matrix to develop our alternatives, and that's your first step. What are the alternatives? Let's list them. What do we have? Let's do the SWOT matrix, and we have to identify the combination of internal and external factors that leads to each alternative. So if we have 4, 5, 6 alternatives, how did we get them? Strength 1 versus in opportunity 3 or whatever. What are those combinations? Okay. We then evaluate the pros and cons. That's step 21. Pros and cons of each one. Again, be detailed. Don't just do a phrase. Don't say like pro is adds more customers. I mean, really, explain to me what that means, how many, and where do you get this, and so forth. So specifically lay out your pros and cons for each option. There may be some costing involved depending on what you're proposing. And then finally, select one or more of the alternatives to implement. So you might say, okay, we've looked at these, and as a package, we're going to implement number 1 and number 4. Or we're not going to implement any of them, or we're going to implement all of them, or whatever you're saying, but provide a rationale as to why you are making the recommendations you're making. Okay, that would be step number 22. Now, any questions on this chapter, which is the nuts and bolts of taking all the research you've done and work you've done and getting from there to actually making some recommendations? All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going do the first of two implementation chapters. And of course, you should think a little bit about implementation in this stage, but we'll get into that more formally in the next chapter that we'll do after break.